Hey, my name is Tim Cooper. I'm really excited to be here with you guys. I have been on staff with North Point Ministries in different capacities for the last 13 years. And for the last 4 years or so, I have been at Brownsbridge doing adult ministries. And, like the rest of you, having gone through this pandemic and having tried to navigate what church is through this time, I found myself in so many conversations, specifically with what I do with discipleship and with groups, and talking about, well, what's changed as a result of this pandemic, and then what hasn't. And the more I started talking about it, the more I found myself in these conversations. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes today talking about, from kind of our perspective, what's changed in regards to discipleship, and then what hasn't. So kind of first off, what hasn't changed is really, the way I like to say it is that relationships are the catalyst. I mean, relationships are the catalyst of what we do. They're the backbone of what we do. Sure, we all try to put on great services and provide great opportunities for people to come and attend. But really, relationships are the catalyst for everything that seems to happen in terms of life change within our ministry and within our churches. And, we always say that life is better connected. And I realized I found myself saying, well, so are pandemics. In my eyes, the worst thing that you can do is go through a pandemic alone. Pandemics are awful enough as they are, but going through a pandemic alone is pretty much unimaginable. And most of us, hopefully, had people we were connected with throughout 2020, and even still as the pandemic continues to go on. In a lot of ways, I remember last January getting on stage and hoping people would listen and take a step towards community. And I've thought about those people a lot over the last year plus, that there's people that trusted us that said, you know what, I have a busy schedule, but I'm going to go ahead and get in a group anyway. And I've thought about the difference of what the pandemic was like for them versus the people that said, you know what, I'm too busy. And then within a short few months, they found their schedules completely cleaned and probably completely alone. And we don't just want people to connect because of the bad stuff that might happen, or that a pandemic might come or something like that. We want people to connect relationally so they can grow spiritually. That hasn't changed. That's been what we have been trying to do since day one. And what's amazing to me is that all of our strategies, we all had systems in place before the pandemic, and whether or not they worked through the pandemic, we didn't even know we were preparing for a pandemic. But the things we were doing 12 months before, 18 months before, 2 years before the pandemic, those systems were put in place to help us get through the pandemic. And the thing that really did across the board is, yeah, there were online services, and yeah, we could stream messages online. But the thing that really kept our church going was community, and it was relationships, and people had an opportunity to continue to grow spiritually throughout the pandemic. So for each of these, I've got 3 things that haven't changed and maybe 3 things that have changed as a result of this pandemic. I've kind of got these statements. So what do we do about the fact that relationships are the catalyst for us as a church? And the way I like to talk about it is, as a church, we look for ways to connect personally over corporately. We look for ways to connect personally over corporately. I feel like there are so many times where we think, okay, how can we communicate this out to the church, right? How can we communicate something out to a whole bunch of people? And that's really good, because we want people to be informed. But every chance we can, I feel like we need to be looking for ways to connect personally. If relationships are the catalyst, how do we help people connect personally with us, not just corporately with our church? So for my team, I know this sometimes slows down momentum, but I think texts and phone calls are a great way to connect versus sending out corporate emails. If we could send out an email on Monday that will hit everybody, or we could take the week to text and reach out to everybody. I think that goes a long way in helping people connect personally over corporately. So what else hasn't changed is really around this idea that all health is a condition, not a destination. And what I mean by that is that treating spiritual health like a destination has big consequences. And I know this because this is something I am tempted to do over and over and over. You see, you can tell you're treating emotional health or spiritual health or anything that like a destination when you hear phrases like, didn't I learn this already? Haven't I already confessed this? Haven't I already tried to get past this? Why am I having to talk about this again? But that's our tendency. Our tendency is to treat things like a destination, that we arrive at something and then we move on to the next thing. But nobody else treats us like that when they're trying to treat our health. Like if I showed up at my doctor's office and I had a cold and, she pulled out her chart and she was like, oh, wow, you were here 9 months ago for a cold. What are you doing back here? I treated that already, right? That'd be ridiculous, right? No, she'd say, okay, you're sick. Let's get you healthy again. But unfortunately, when it comes to emotional health, when it comes to people's spiritual growth, we treat it like a destination at times. And it has really, really big consequences when we do that. And one of the ways I've seen this play out is that I tend to label volunteers as healthy and just assume they're going to stay there for as long as I know them. Well, 2020 took leaders and volunteers in our church that I have known for years and years. And honestly, they started acting kind of strange. They started acting kind of different. And I acted kind of different and I acted kind of strange. I mean, 2020 was such a going through a pandemic, going through an election, trying to figure out how to navigate all this stuff did not bring out the best in me. And the more I was concerned about if I had already learned this lesson or not, the longer I was putting off actually getting healthy. So our job is to help the sick realize they're sick and move towards health. Now that's obviously not a campaign slogan that we're going to roll out this fall. We're not going to say, hey guys, our job is to help you realize how sick you are and move on from it. But I had lunch last week with a leader that I interviewed and approved and, brought into one of our ministries, called Starting Point about 9 or 10 years ago. And they've been great for about the last 9 years. And this pandemic has really brought them to a place that I've never seen them operate out of this kind of emotional unwellness. And so, we went out to lunch last week and they wanted to talk about the topic that they were so fired up about. And I remember going into that lunch, all I was thinking is, how do I help them realize what it's like to sit on the other side of them? Yes, they want to engage in the topic that they think we as a church are getting wrong and they're getting really fired up about. And that's really important to them. But to me, seeing them navigate really tricky things before in such a healthy manner, and now all of a sudden not be able to operate in an emotionally neutral way was really concerning. But instead of just writing them off like I want to do and just say, oh, you were a good leader, now you're a bad leader, I'm done with you, I felt like my goal is to help them take steps towards health and to help offer them steps towards health, and ask questions and not even engage necessarily in the topic, but ask questions like, hey, are you aware are you aware that this is causing you a huge emotional reaction? I've been in some tricky situations with you where we've dealt with people, and different volunteers, and I've never seen you react like that. What do you think is causing such a reaction like this? Trying to treat their health as a condition and not as a destination, I feel like helps them not stay stuck and actually take steps towards healing. So as a church, we avoid valuing numerical growth over personal growth. or we at least diligently manage the tension between the two. Now, I know that sounds like a hard left turn, but I'm just being honest. This is the thing that keeps me in the way of paying attention to growth and to life change, is getting so caught up in the numbers and getting so caught up in the attendance of something and how many people came to something. And my tendency, if I'm not careful, is I don't celebrate the sick getting healthy. I celebrate large numbers in certain areas. And I don't want to do that. I didn't get into ministry to get large groups of people to attend certain things, right? I got into ministry to see people's lives change and to see people move towards health. And I want myself to do that, but I also want the people that I'm fortunate enough to lead to do that as well. So I want us to look at this as this hasn't changed. Numbers weren't more important before the pandemic, and they aren't more important now. What's important is helping people take steps towards health. And then the last one that hasn't changed, and this is something Andy has been talking about for years, but it's so good. And it's like, we'll move on from this when it's when it's not true, or it's no longer really challenging. But it's this idea to think steps, not programs. To think steps, not programs. It is so easy for me to get caught up in good ideas and to think, what would draw a crowd, and what would be great is to do this thing or to try this thing. But relationships are changed by small steps, not by attendance in programs, right? People's lives are changed. The more you get to hear stories of life change, even when they are associated with, I started attending this, or I started attending that. That's a lot of people's first steps is attending something. But a lot of times there's a step out of that thing they're attending that allowed their life to change so dramatically. So everything that we're doing, everything that we try to offer, is a step towards a life-changing relationship, not just a step towards attendance in a program. So saying no to good programs can actually help you create really great next steps. And here's what this looks like for me. I mentioned before, I'm in adult ministries. And so for years, we've offered groups January and August. You can get in groups in January or August. Well, the challenge with that is if somebody comes to the church February 1st, right, and they say, I'm new to your church and I want to take a next step. And we're like, great. In August, we have a great next step for you, right? Nobody loves saying that. So we've tried different things throughout the year to kind of bridge that gap. And one of the things we've tried is short-term groups. And so we would come up with a topic, and we would throw a lot of money and effort and energy into creating a 4 to 6 week opportunity for people to come. And we would say, get a taste of community that would kind of bridge the gap between the February, March, April timeframe to get them towards something in August. And we did this for years, and we really tried hard at this. But one of the things that I noticed is I was getting so focused on the attendance at the short-term groups that I wasn't paying attention to what it was doing to our overall community numbers and our overall group numbers. And so we would get hundreds of people to come to these short-term groups, but I wasn't paying attention to the fact that it was lowering our numbers again and again into long-term community. So in order to solve one problem, I had created another by creating basically a program that I thought was a step. I was trying to create a step, but I created a program that actually hindered the best step that I have for people to move towards health and to move towards life-changing relationships. So, when you have to decide to cut a program that is really well attended, you want to have a really good reason why. And all of this for me has been under the banner of we want to think steps, not programs. So we got rid of short-term groups a few months ago, and Brownsbridge Church is not a young church in our organization. It's over a decade old. And sometimes it's harder to give people one option in a church that's been around for a little bit. But what we've seen when we took away the competing system and we offered long-term community as the step for people, we saw our numbers increase by double-digit percentages year over year, which was amazing to see, right? It's amazing to see people going back to this step and then seeing the life change that comes as a result. So as a church, we've got to avoid this quantity over quality myth of programming. And that is so hard to do. It is so hard to do, because I love standing at the back of a really well-attended program. And I love standing there and just hearing and seeing all these people, and people walk out and they're like, this is the best ever. We love it. Do more of this. But if I'm only focused on that attendance, I'm going to just be chasing the next large environment to the next large environment. And so now it's not, recently our men's ministry, they did a cornhole tournament. They did a cornhole tournament, and, it was feeling to me kind of like a program. Well, we didn't, the right step wasn't to nix the idea, right? It wasn't to make the idea go away. The best thing to do was figure out, okay, how do we make this a step? And then how do we create next steps out of it? So instead of just doing a men's cornhole tournament, we brought the men's groups together, encouraged the men's groups to come and do this, but also to invite people and then talk about groups, and then make it feel like it was a groups sponsored event where we could talk about our best step for them in the church. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to think through in what hasn't changed. But when I start thinking about what has changed as a result of the pandemic, the easy answer is kind of a lot. A lot has changed. I've read about this. I certainly didn't make this up, but I don't remember where I read it, that 2020 really has been the great accelerator. We've got churches that didn't have an online service to only existed online, right, for a number of months at a time. We've had people that, working from home and doing all these things that were maybe unheard of before the pandemic started, and now are kind of commonplace. That there's just been such an accelerator on things that, honestly, didn't even think were possible. Even for my kids' events, my kids' sports, different things like that, getting entire seasons just wiped out, just gone. It really was a year of the unthinkable. And the more we look into, hopefully, the end of the pandemic, or returning back to normal, one of the things that's changed really is the customer. The people that we're trying to reach to disciple, the people we're trying to get into groups. You think about it, everyone in the world just went through the same event. That doesn't happen. I think back to September 11th was probably the last time in my life where at least the entire country went through an event together, and there was something, that we shared in common, even if it was horrific. But now you're talking about the entire world, that there wasn't a corner of the world untouched by this pandemic. And you have people kind of resurfacing after that, and they've changed. And, one thing that we need to consider is that we might have less time to make a good impression than ever before. That people couldn't be, maybe they were lonely during this pandemic, but maybe they're more emboldened. It's like, I just survived a pandemic. I just got through this without the church. I don't think I need the church. I don't think I need to come visit your church. I don't know if I need to be a part of anything that you're doing. We've got less time to make a good impression. I think people are going to be way more taking advantage of travel and taking advantage of things when they're opened up, than just willing to give up a Sunday and say, hey, sure, I'll check out your church, right? Yeah, I'll come to that on a Sunday. So as a church, we have to understand that what's worked in the past might not in the present. And I know this is a really silly example, but I've been a pastor 15 years, and one of the things that's worked for 15 years has been free t-shirts. And I don't know why that is, but it always works. And so we're heading up into launch groups in the fall, and we're back in the building and we're meeting, and we were like, you know what, let's give all of our current group leaders a t-shirt and ask them to wear it on Sundays so that we can see people around. We can say, hey, if you see them in one of those shirts, tell them thanks, and look at all these group leaders that we've got throughout the church. So we ordered hundreds of these shirts, and we said, just come over the next couple Sundays and pick them up. And I'm telling you, this has always worked. It did not work. We are going to be using these t-shirts as like dish rags for, I don't know, however long that we can be around. We have so many extra shirts. It's not even funny, but this has always worked. And I know that's a silly example. It's just t-shirts, but the thing that it does have me thinking, the thing that my team is talking about is like, wait, what has worked in the past might not necessarily work in the future. And as we are continuing to continue to do more things and offer more opportunities for people, I think we have to look at this in a way as, wait a minute, what's worked in the past might not be working in the future. And what else has changed is, and this one's, I don't want to say harder, but I do think this one is incredibly important. What's changed is that you and I have to lead ourselves well first. There has not been a season that I've been a part of where leading ourselves as church staff has been more important. I think there have been seasons where I've gotten by on what's good enough. There's been seasons where I've neglected completely my own growth because honestly, I wasn't seeing any harm done. So it's like, if something's not broken that I can tell, why not just keep doing what I'm doing? But, I've realized, and hopefully you've realized, that you're not a superhero. We're not in ministry because of our abundance of awesomeness, right? We did not get into ministry because we were just better than everybody, and now we have this amazing stuff to hand off to everyone. But this pandemic has heightened that, and it has made a lot of us aware of our limitations in some ways. And one of the ways I say this, I've been saying this for years, and it's mostly because I'm trying to convince myself of it. But the dependent version of you is the best version of you. It's just the version of yourself that you kind of fight the most. And what I mean is, when we are dependent on God and we own it, it's actually the best version of us because we're constantly dependent on God. And so when we find ourselves in that posture of dependency, we're not operating as a superhero, right? No superhero is like totally in need all the time, right? That doesn't make for a great superhero movie, right? Where the superhero is like, well, I just have these issues and I got to work through this stuff. And nobody's really paying to see that. But that's not us, right? We are dependent. We are, what we have to offer is our dependency on God, and for God to show up and then to be used by God, right? That's what we have to offer. But a lot of times that gets put to the back burner. That gets put, people that get to prioritize their health are the people that burn out, or we prioritize, sabbaticals and retreats and these things for the people that are the most unhealthy, instead of prioritizing what's most important. And one of the things that has changed, or at least has accelerated drastically, is that culture watches and reports on how we behave. Right? Culture, they don't necessarily report on how well we do as a church. They report on how we behave. Podcasts, documentaries, different things are on a lot of times on pastors, on some of their sin. I saw a major network recently that is releasing a documentary on a pastor who had an affair, and now that affair, that sin, is now going to be kind of the most prominent thing attached to this person's name. And I hate that. I mean, I hate that with a passion, but I'm sure they do too. They didn't get into ministry to hopefully one day have some TV network do a documentary on their sin. But think about a few years ago, if they would have just led themselves well first. Think about the impact that could have had. Maybe their church would have been smaller, right? But maybe their kids wouldn't be dragged through the mud of what their sin had done to them. Maybe the ripple effect of their reputation wouldn't be about the sin in their life. It would be about how God's using them. And maybe it's not to the scale that they would hope, but maybe it would be healthy. See, who you are, not what you know, is paramount. And who you are is so much more important than what you do. We get so caught up in this lie that what we achieve is somehow more important than how we treat people. And I forget this all the time. I will come home after a good day's work and not be as concerned about how I treat my family at the dinner table as I am about how well that talk went or how many people liked what I did or what I said. But this starts with us. I mean, soul care should not be reserved for those who burn out. And one of the things that we need to pay attention to is, what is our reaction when we're stuck? What's your reaction when you're stuck or somebody you're leading is stuck? Do you have patience for them to heal? Do you have patience and time for yourself to heal? You break a bone or you do something like that. You have all the patience in the world for that to heal. But what about when your soul gets unhealthy and you notice it? Do you have patience? Do you look for opportunities to allow your soul to heal instead of just worry about the output in your life and the worry about the output in your ministry? See, as a church, we have to focus on who people are becoming, and this absolutely starts with us. I said this before, I've been a pastor for about 15 years, and I've realized most of that time I start my week or my month, I start my time out based on what meetings I have. I plan my week out by what meetings I'm going to do or what meetings I'm going to attend, not on the priority of what should be most important in my life. I can't tell you how embarrassing it is to think back on 15 years of ministry and think that I did not plan a lot of those weeks around how to be a better follower of Jesus and a healthier husband and a healthier father and a better friend. And all those things of trying to set up my weeks and my months and my years around how to get more done instead of how to become more of the person that Jesus wants me to be. See, what's changed is I feel like I don't have that excuse anymore of being able to say, well, I will get to that later. My job, your job, is to lead yourself well first. And a lot of that plays into this last one on what has changed. And it's around how the church is viewed. How the church is viewed really has changed over the last 2 years. See, that I can't tell you, I'm not alone in this. I know you've had so many of these conversations, but I have had way too many conversations over the last year about the church being opened or closed, right? The church being opened or closed. Why aren't you open? Or why are you opened, right? Both sides, people upset that we're open, people upset that we're not open. But the whole thing is kind of a myth, right? Sporting events open and close. Movie theaters, they open, they close. Concerts, they open, they close. Eventually, you have to leave. The church does not open and close, right? The church grows or the church shrinks. The church is expanding or the church is shrinking, but it does not open and it does not close. I did not pay attention to this beforehand because other than, a week or two a year, or maybe the occasional snowstorm, we never closed the doors of the church. So I never really had to think about church like this. But to me, it is so important for us to help own the fact that we've created a bunch of people that are more interested in attendance in our worship services than they are life change, right? Than they are seeing the fruits of the Spirit displayed in their lives. And I wish I'd asked better questions even throughout the last, 12 months about what is it that you're missing on our weekend services that you don't feel like you can get in corporate worship and all these different things. I'm sure there's great things, but behind that, I felt some ownership on this about, man, I have done a lot to create consumers. I feel like I've done a lot to help perpetuate this idea that I want to come to the church, I want to receive, and then I want to go away. I want to come to the church, I want to receive, and then we want to go away. I feel like, not intentionally, of course, right? But I've done a part in creating people that care more about attendance in our buildings than transformation in their lives. And as a church, one of the things that I have found myself paying attention to as we look forward, I want to be a part of rebuilding the church, not reopening the church. See, as a church, we are going to rebuild from what's happened over the last 12 to 24 months. We're not going to reopen. And, our volunteers numbers are down. Our attendance is certainly not back to where it was pre-pandemic. And that's bad if you're reopening and hoping that it would just be kind of like a floodgate. But if you're rebuilding the church, then this is where we're supposed to be, right? Jesus isn't surprised by this. I don't think God's disappointed in us that our attendance is somewhere that it's not. I think what we need to do is be looking at how do we rebuild this church that we've been asked to steward. So I look at these things, I'm sure, I'm positive that you could come up with 10 more things that have changed, 3 things that haven't changed, 3 things that have changed. I know that you've got a bunch of things that have changed, but specifically when it comes to discipleship and how we're helping people, these 6 things have just stood out to me and been things that I feel like I'm talking about over and over and over again. And as we talk about rebuilding the church, groups has such a big part of rebuilding the church, right? We rebuild the church one changed life at a time. Life-changing relationships is how we rebuild the church. So as we're looking at all these different things, my hope for you, I know you're potentially tired, not coming out of a pandemic refreshed and ready to rebuild and ready to re-engage. But I hope more than anything that you would hear permission, not from me, certainly, but from your Heavenly Father, to lead yourself well first, to not get caught up in the what ifs of what might happen if you don't do these things and you don't achieve these goals and you don't get to these places that you're hoping you will, but that more than anything, that you would feel the permission to lead yourself well first. So one of the things that I do have is we do have some discussion questions to go through, and there's 6 different topics, so I've got 6 different questions for you to think through and maybe process, and maybe one of these 6 sparked your interest, and you could go back and either talk this through with your teams or maybe talk this through with the people that you're watching with. But in regards to what hasn't changed, do your current programs create barriers or bridges to relationship buildings, right? If relationships are the catalyst, do our current programs create barriers or bridges to relationship buildings? Are people regularly getting introduced to life-changing relationships within our ministry? Number 2, what areas of your ministry help people get healthy? And what areas don't? Is the language of your community of faith one of destination or of condition? I love this conversation. I hope this is one that you can think through, but just paying attention to your own language and the way you treat yourself around health. Is it a condition or a destination? Love these ones. Then number three, around what hasn't changed, is your current model. This is the think steps, not programs one, but is your current model built on programs that attract numbers or on steps that grow disciples? Now that's a little heavy-handed because obviously programs help us grow disciples, but are we thinking through this in the lens of steps? Or are we thinking through it in the lens of programs? And then on what has changed, is there anything that you're having a hard time letting go of, right? Realizing people have changed, things have changed. Is there anything you have a hard time letting go of that might not work for the current world that we're in? And then maybe a follow-up to that could be, have we fallen back on education rather than transformation? If you'll remember just talking through that, when we tend to look at people as if they're stuck and we need to educate them out of that, is that something that we have fallen back on? And number two, what is preventing you from prioritizing your own health and growth? What would have to change in your everyday life for you to prioritize your own health and growth? I'd love for you to think through that one. And then number three, if you were starting over with your church, what would you do differently? How can groups help rebuild the church? Love this idea of, as we're not reopening, as we're rebuilding, it's, for some of us, it's an opportunity to do things a little differently. So what would we do differently as we rebuild the church? Yeah, so I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I'm so grateful for what you do. You're doing a ton of work and you're trying the best you can. And I think that's great. So I hope we get a chance to talk through this sometime. I always love the back and forth more than just me talking at you. But yeah, I'm grateful for what you do. And I hope this spurs on some conversation around what has changed and what hasn't changed over the last 12 months.